BitSwap is the hottest new way to trade tokens. Crawling all the top decentralized exchanges, BitSwap will get you the very best price and value for your trades. BitSwap is changing the game. Try it now at bitswapdex.com.
Welcome to Rice TVX. On today's Rice Report, our guest is George Gammon, who is an entrepreneur, a self-proclaimed macroeconomics addict, and the host of the Rebel Capitalist. Now, George has been on the show before, and I'm going to have the links down below and above for his first appearance. And as always, I encourage you to check that one out. But before we get into it, if this just happens to be your first time ever watching any of my videos, I do encourage you to check out and explore my channel. Make sure you're subscribed, smash that like button, and hit that notification bell so you can stay up to date with my videos as they come out. Be sure you're following me on Odyssey.com, where I have backups of all of my videos and post up extra content. This is where you know you can find me just in case something ever happens to my YouTube channel. I would also like to encourage everyone to check out my Patreon channel. I have lots of free videos there, but if you decide to become a patron, you would get early access to videos, exclusive content, and it's a way to support the channel directly. Check out Rice Radio. If you want some Rice on the go, we have select episodes from Rice TVX featured on Rice Radio, hosted on Anchor.fm, and available on every major podcasting platform. Make sure you're taking advantage of my partnership with Money Metals Exchange. Get your free half ounce of silver. All you need to do is go to moneymetals.com, be a first-time buyer, purchase $100 or more, and be sure you use the promo code RICE, R-I-C-E, to get that free half ounce of silver, and it's an additional way to support the channel as well. I will include links down below for everything I just mentioned, as well as everything we talk about on today's show. And before I forget, in case you don't know or you did not hear, I recently got a strike from YouTube regarding the interview that I did with Max Egan and wasn't able to post up videos for 7 days. So with that being said, make sure you're heading over to the newly launched RiceTVX.com website. Sign up on the mailing list so that you never miss an update or new Rice TVX content. I'm also going to be having merchandise available soon via the shop. I would also encourage everyone to make sure you're following me on my backup channel on YouTube, Rice TVX 2, the sequel. All right, ladies and gentlemen, joining me on today's episode of the Rice Report is George Gammon, who is the host of George Gammon YouTube channel and also the Rebel Capitalist show. And I'm going to have links down below so you can check out his channels if you're not familiar. He's got an audio podcast. He's been on the show before, and I will have links down below so that you guys can check out that first conversation that we had together. But George, welcome back to Rice TVX. How you doing today?
I'm doing extremely well. Thanks for having me back.
And I'm looking forward to the conversation. I appreciate accepting the invitation. We've got some interesting things to talk about. And so, okay, let me kind of get this. I'll tell you how I wanted to do this. I wanted to talk about the your video that you just put out in regards to the shocking new repo market details, where you're talking about the possibility that QE isn't real, which I really found to be very fascinating, the smoke and mirrors. So I wanted to talk about that. I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about inflation, the digital currencies, the government coins, and then you put out a video yesterday as well talking about Janet Yellen and the fact that she says that we shouldn't be concerned with inflation, that we should be concerned with the fact that the government's not spending enough money.
Yeah, exactly. That it's just a word play, because she's saying that the budget, the official budget adjusted for inflation, is lower than it was in 2010, as if the budget is some sort of constraint for government spending, when last year we had like a $5 trillion deficit. I mean, it's completely absurd.
It's crazy. And what's really funny is, because I mean, I really do like your videos, and I like your style. You do some really cool whiteboard videos. But what cracked me up was you're like, every day you wake up and you read some news and you're like, this is the craziest news I've ever heard.
It
And
can't get any crazier than this.
And then you wake up the next day and you're like, oh, I was wrong. It's crazier. And it's like getting more and more bizarre, more and more insane. It's like, I'm not even really sure if we're actually on the planet Earth anymore.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It feels like you're in some sort of weird, like Twilight Zone, parallel universe every single time you look at the news, or every single time you hear what Janet Yellen is saying, or Biden or Powell. It's completely bizarre.
That reminds me of a meme that I was trying to find, and I'll try to flash it up on the screen, but it was let me see if I can find it really quick. Yeah. It says, even I'll just show it real quick and I'll let everybody see it, but it says, even the Twilight Zone. Have you ever seen Black Mirror on Netflix by any chance? Okay.
Yeah.
I would compare it a little bit more closer to that and Idiocracy, the movie. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that one.
Yeah, I had a bunch of people suggest I watch that episode of Black Mirror where they do the social score. Yeah. And I found that to be extremely disturbing, while at the same time, I think that's a glimpse into what we could potentially see in the future, especially going back to your comment on the central bank digital currency.
Oh, no, I totally agree. So with everything that I wanted to talk about, I guess the Janet Yellen stuff is pretty much just what it was. I just wanted to comment because I just thought, like you had said, it was just completely insane. $5 trillion deficit in 2020 and 25% of the money supply put out last year.
Yeah, the big thing that people have to realize with, I mean, there's so much to discuss in what she was saying there. But first, you got to realize that currently government spending as a percentage of GDP, or was about 57% last time I did the back of the napkin math, right? So what she's saying is she wants more government spending. Okay. In other words, she wants government spending to be a higher percentage of GDP. Okay. Well, at what point do we cross the threshold where you would officially call it socialism? And at what point would we officially cross the threshold into communism? Because if government spending is 100% of GDP, then we're definitely not at capitalism. We're definitely not at free market capitalism there. Right. So, where are we? And you look at communist Russia. Okay, well, that was their government spending was basically 100% of GDP, or it was a result of the government, right? They're owning the means of production. They're responsible for it. And so basically what Janet Yellen is saying is she wants us to be more and more and more like communist Russia. She wants our economy to be centrally planned to a greater degree. Now, to give you some context, or your viewers, if you go back prior to the Fed, I'm talking about 1912, 1913, right around then, the government spending represented about 3 to 5% of GDP. So said another way, the private sector represented 97% or 95% of GDP. So I'm sure your viewers have had experience with the local DMV.
I'm sure most have, yeah.
Fill in the blank government agency. And then they've also had experience with Amazon or FedEx, let's say. Do you think an economy is more dynamic with 95% of the output as a result of government spending, or 95% of the output as a result of the free market capitalism? So then you have to really take a step back and ask yourself, how do we define, how do you measure wealth? Right? And it seems like a very easy question, but when you think it through, it's not. Because most people, if I said, well, if you have $100 in your bank account right now, if you wake up next year and you have $10 million in your bank account, are you wealthier? And the average person would say, well, yes, absolutely, I'm wealthier because I have more currency units. I have more dollars. I have more green pieces of paper. Or what's really happening is there's just more commercial bank liabilities in the system. So somehow that makes us richer. But what they don't understand is all the dollar is a potential claim on goods and services. So if you have $10 million, but you can't buy a loaf of bread, then you are poorer, right? And people say, oh, well, that's hyperinflation. We're not going to get there in a year. Not really, because it's also just a dramatic reduction in the amount of goods and services available. Well, let's use me as an example, right? My portfolio, my investment portfolio, is much larger today than it was in 2019. Okay. But in 2019, I could get an Uber in 3 minutes, no matter where I was. I could be out in the boonies and I could still get an Uber. I could get a reservation at a nice restaurant. You know, I could get a rental car. I could do all these things that today is a bit of an unknown. I mean, if I'm trying to get an Uber now, I don't know if I can get one. I mean, I know. Is it going to take an hour? Is it going to take 2 hours? You know, if you want to go out to dinner tonight, it's Friday night, maybe you can, maybe you can't. It depends because they're so short staffed. My point is there's fewer goods and services available to us. So am I richer now or am I poorer now? And I would argue that I'm poorer because I have access to less stuff, even though I might, the nominal number of my overall portfolio has increased. You see, so hopefully people get my point there. So what Janet Yellen is somehow implying is that we're all going to be richer if the government just creates and spends more currency units into the economy. But what she's completely ignoring, and what shows you just such an extreme disconnect with these quote unquote educated Keynesian economists, is that they ignore the fact that wealth is the amount of goods and services a society can create efficiently. It has nothing to do with the amount of currency units, or else Venezuela would be the richest society on the planet Earth. Because they have by far the most amount of currency units, you see. And so that's the path we're going down. Whenever you see like stimulus, another stimulus package, or whenever you see, Janet Yellen talking about more government spending, you just have to simply ask a question. Is this going to lead to society producing fewer or greater goods and services in the future? And I think that's what the lens that people really need to use when they're trying to decipher what the central planners are saying and what their objectives are. And I would put that, I would apply that not only to Janet Yellen, but to Biden, to Jerome Powell, to the IMF, and to the World Economic Forum.
Yeah, no, I would completely agree. Now, everything that you said about Janet Yellen talking about more government spending, we also see Biden talking about the $6 trillion budget for 2022 and stuff. Is that kind of the more government spending, or are they all kind of working together just to kind of make people feel comfortable about this amount of money being put out?
Well, I think it's both. I think you're right in the sense that they've got to slowly boil the frog. You can't just come right out and say, okay, we're going to spend $20 trillion this year. I think in the back of their mind, that's what they want.
I would totally agree.
I don't think they can come right out and say, okay, we want to increase your taxes to 90%. But I think, she was talking about a 15% global corporate tax. I guarantee you she doesn't want a 15% global corporate tax. She wants a 80% global corporate tax, but she knows that she can't just come out and say it because there'd be too much sticker shock. So she's got to slowly acclimate people to becoming more accustomed to higher taxes or to greater government spending. You know, they've got to condition you slowly, I think is what I'm trying to say. And I think that you've got a group of individuals, these Davos types, that truly believe the path to this socialist utopia is through more and more and more control, consolidated control and power, and more central planning. And I think everything that you were talking about there, as far as the topics you wanted to discuss, really lead to that end result.
I would completely agree, and I think that's kind of why I had chose those topics, because we are kind of headed in that direction that they're pushing with the World Economic Forum, pushing the whole idea of the greater reset. You will own nothing and be happy. The new issue of the Economist magazine came out on 5/8/2021, so like 20 days ago. We're recording this on Friday the 28th. It'll probably be coming out this coming Sunday. Have you seen the cover of that magazine with the Gov coins?
No, you know, I used to really enjoy reading The Economist when I first got into macro back in like 2012, 2013. But as of the last like 2 years, I can't read it. It's nonsense.
Well, it's kind of I think it was like 33 years later after the 1988 one. Where it has the cover, the infamous cover with the phoenix rising out of the burning fiat with the medallion on his neck that's got the binary 0 and talks about get ready for one world currency or something to that effect.
Yeah. I mean, I think they're really rubbing elbows with the whole group that we were referring to. You know, these CEOs and a lot of the hedge fund managers, all the banksters, you know, the global elite, if you want to call them that. They all see kind of, not, I shouldn't say they all do, but the majority of them really see eye to eye and have drank the whole Kool-Aid that they are intellectually superior to everyone else, and they're somehow enlightened, and they somehow have received a vision that us normal people and us rubes in the real world and in society just cannot get our heads around. And therefore, for the greater good, they need to take control of society and the global economy. I think that's kind of how they see it. Okay,
that makes sense. With inflation, something that, you know, I know people like yourself, Lynette Zhang, myself, lots of economists have been talking about the idea that we are going to be experiencing inflation, the possibility of hyperinflation. You're hearing about it on the news now. You're seeing it. You're feeling it. It's not quite as bad, but obviously I think it's going to start getting worse and just keep growing, kind of that slow drip we were talking about. What are your thoughts on inflation, when we could really start seeing some really high impacts from this inflation? And do you think that we could experience a hyperinflationary event?
Well, I think it's possible. It's a matter of probabilities.
Is that sun killing your eyes?
Yeah, it is, but I'll keep going. I don't have a way out of it.
Or something?
I can't. The further I go back, the more the sun. I'm trying to get close to the things.
I'm sorry, man. I was just noticing. I was kind of feeling your pain.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I'll try to power through. But now I lost my train of thought.
Inflation.
What were you saying?
Inflation, hyperinflation.
Inflation. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Sorry, my bad.
So inflation is very difficult because, first of all, you have to break it down by what you're talking about as far as it going up relative to the dollar. So are we talking about goods and services? Are we talking about asset prices? Are we talking about a basket of foreign currencies, which would be the DXY? what exactly is going up in price, because you can have consumer price inflation while at the same time you can have asset price deflation. And the example I usually use is the beginning of the 1970s, how we had obviously significant consumer price inflation during that time frame, but the stock market went down by 50% in nominal terms from 72 to 74. So the process doesn't have to happen in lockstep.
Okay.
So you have to start by compartmentalizing what type of inflation you're referring to. Now, most people, I think, would refer to prices in for consumer goods and services and for assets, but they combine those things and they conflate the two, and I don't think they should. So once people compartmentalize that, let's say that we're specifically talking about consumer goods and services.
Okay.
Then you have to really ask yourself the question: what is the system of the monetary system, the dollar network, and the creation or destruction of dollars? That the way it works, is it going to be the same in a year or in 3 years? And I'll try to break that down so most people can follow what I'm saying. In the past, for decades, the commercial banking system has been in charge of the dollar. When I say that, I mean they're in charge of creating additional dollars, because when a bank lends, let's say they lend you $500,000 to buy a new house, they're not taking existing dollars from people's bank accounts and giving them to you. That's kind of a misconception. What they're doing is they're creating brand new dollars that didn't exist before. So the broad money supply, in other words, the amount of currency units chasing goods and services in the real economy, has just increased by $500,000.
Because the fractional reserve banking, because of it.
Yeah, kind of.
Okay.
The balance sheet kind of works the same, but they're literally creating new dollars, and now they're really not constrained by reserves at all. But that's all. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. So then, if you were to pay that loan back, then that reduces the money supply or the dollar supply by $500,000. You see, so you have this push and pull happening all the time. So if the government, let's say, needs inflation, consumer price inflation, because they're trying to increase nominal GDP, so their tax receipts go up relative to their overall debt. So basically, they're paying the debt back with cheaper dollars. Then, in order to create that environment, you would think there would need to be more currency units or dollars in the real economy chasing goods and services. But you see, that's process is held hostage, if you will. But and this is them saying that. I don't say that. But the process is held hostage by the commercial banking system. See, because if they're not lending, there's no more dollars being created.
Right.
Therefore, very difficult to have consumer price inflation. That's the way it's worked for decades. Now what we see is kind of a hybrid system where the banks, the commercial banks, are still responsible for creating the majority of dollars, but the government is coming in with all of this deficit spending, and they're not extracting the dollars from the real economy and then just redistributing those dollars to a different group of people. So on net balance, the amount of dollars is the same. That's usually what they do when Janet Yellen goes to the Treasury auction and, let's say, sells $50 billion worth of treasuries. If you and I and corporations or whatever, if we're buying those bonds, she is taking those dollars out of the system and then putting them back in. But if the Fed is buying those bonds basically directly, through a shell game with the primary dealer banks, then she isn't sucking the dollars out of the system. So when she spends the dollars out of the TGA, that's a net increase to broad money or M2 money supply. So we have this weird hybrid thing going on where the banks are creating fewer dollars because they're lending less, but the government is creating more dollars because they've got this huge deficit that, by the way, Janet Yellen wants to expand, and the Fed is monetizing it. So why does Janet Yellen want the government to spend more money? Why does Biden, why does every time you hear Jerome Powell speak, why does he pound the table for more and more fiscal spending? Because they understand what I'm saying. They understand the commercial banks are in charge of the dollar, and they know they need a hell of a lot more dollars to bail out the government, because the on-balance sheet debt is 28, 29 trillion. The off-balance sheet debt, I mean, who knows?
Right.
So in order for the government to sustain itself, to try to reduce the debt to GDP, they need that inflation. They realize the only way to do that is through additional dollars, and the only way to do that is to get around the commercial banking system. So if you believe the system is going to stay the way it was, I think you would have to be in the deflation camp, especially when it comes to the bucket of asset prices. Now, as far as the bucket of consumer prices, I think you could see kind of a drop down lower, like we saw in the GFC, but then kind of a gradual uptick in kind of this, as measured by the CPI, and I don't really buy those numbers, but as measured by the CPI, it kind of goes up to maybe a 1 or 2% type of inflation per annum. But if we have this hybrid system, then it becomes a question of, it's not really an economic question, it's a political question, because you have to make a decision as to how much more the government is going to spend, therefore how many more dollars they're going to create. And by the way, how much more supply of goods and services they're going to destroy. I mean, they're doing a hell of a job destroying goods and services right now. We already talked about that, by paying people to stay home and not go to work, or all of the malinvestment and misallocation of resources that we're seeing. So they're adding supply of dollars while destroying supply of goods and services. And that's why you've seen such a dramatic spike in inflation. Now, does it continue? Again, that's a political question, because now we're in this hybrid system where the government is responsible, but the banks are responsible as well. I think that we could move into, and this is kind of my base case, that in 3 to 5 years, we could move into this situation that's a third option. So the central bank understands that now, the politicians are kind of in control, but they're inconsistent. It's volatile. You can't depend on them. And we need to take control of everything. And therefore, they go to a central bank digital currency. Now, why is that so dramatically different than what we see today? Because a lot of people will say, oh, well, the dollar is already digital. That really doesn't make any, that's not a huge, paradigm shift. But it is, because if we all had an account with the Fed, you, me, the entities, the local subway, the gym, we all have an account with the Fed, then the Fed could lend directly into the real economy. Well, if they're lending directly into the real economy, what are they doing? They're creating more dollars. Right? Now, let's go back to what we were talking about with that TV show you were referencing. I believe, what is it, the Black Mirror or whatever?
Black Mirror, yeah.
Okay, so in that episode, the gal was kind of held hostage by her social score, because every single component of society, you were being measured all the time by how nice and how, whatever the prevailing narrative was, that's what you were measured against. And that social score was a real big deal. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the commercial banks lend on something called a credit score, or they lend on your ability to pay them back, right? Your interest rate is predicated upon an algorithm that supposedly tells them what the likelihood is that you make good on that loan with interest that you've just taken from the bank. Why do they do that? Well, they do that because they're a free market entity. This is capitalism, and there's profit and there's loss. And if they have a lot of those loans go bad, they could go into a position of negative equity and go bust. So they're constrained by their profit and loss. They're constrained by having to stay in business. You see? Therefore, they're constrained based on your ability to pay them back. Well, the Fed doesn't have those constraints.
Right.
You see, if you don't pay the Fed back, what happens? If the Fed has negative equity, what happens?
To me, it doesn't affect them. It's all monopoly money anyways.
Yeah. So I think, and this has never really been tested, but I think the Fed could have negative equity and it really wouldn't, no one would know any different. So my point is, if the Fed is controlling all of the commercial lending, they don't need a credit score. They could do that based on your social score. You see? So whatever special interest group had political favor at the time, well, they would get more of the loans, or they would get a lower interest rate, or whatever they came up with to try to make things quote unquote equal. Right? Because the one thing the central planners have in common, all the central planners that we've been talking about, is they don't really value equality of opportunity. They really want equality of outcome. You see? So they can use the central bank to make all outcomes as equal as they possibly can through the distribution of the dollar and the leveraging of the dollar network through a commercial or through a central bank digital currency. And I think that this takes us to the next topic, if you want to explore it, which is there's no such thing as QE. And with the reverse repos that we've been seeing lately.
Now, real quick, I'm going to do a screen share, and I'm going to, so we could talk a little bit about that video. And I wanted to let everybody know, again, there's going to be links down below. And at the end, I meant to ask you that at the beginning, but at the end, I wanted to get you to talk about Rebel Capitalist Pro and what's offered there. But
sure, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I meant to do that at the very beginning. I'm doing this interview a lot earlier than I normally do interviews. I'm kind of on West Coast time, even though I live on the East Coast.
Yeah.
So the video, you can see the screen, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so for everybody who's watching, it's the video on Repo Capitalist channel, the shocking new repo market details discovered, QE isn't real, and then the follow-up video. And I think today, Friday the 28th, you're going to be doing a whiteboard video, if I'm not mistaken. Correct. Yeah, which I'm really looking.
It's supposed to come out last night, but we had some editing issues, so it'll be out tonight.
That's what I heard on Wednesday. I thought it was coming out yesterday.
Yeah,
but that's cool.
It's whiteboard videos. Most people don't realize it, but there's a lot of editing that goes into that, and
I can
tell. Take a long time to do. Like these videos that you're seeing on the Rebel Capitalist channel, they're just quick live streams. It takes me like 10, 20 minutes. But those whiteboard videos, it's a whole like a 2-day process.
And dude, I would tell you honestly, like your whiteboard videos are probably some of my favorite videos when it comes to dealing with economics and just getting a really good comprehension. You do a really good job explaining, and I really dig the whiteboard video. So I am looking forward to this one coming out today. That'll be out by the time when people watch this. But this way, the way you explain this, I was like, whoa. So like the whole idea of quantitative easing not even being a reality, like a smoke and mirrors, like it's. I'm just thinking of 2008. And I'm like, if quantitative easing isn't real, what the hell did we do to get through 2008 to get here? It was like I felt the quantitative easing was a way of injecting capital into the system to keep it alive. As Lynette Zhang says, it's a zombie system that's put on life support.
Yeah, so you have to go back and start by understanding how a commercial bank works. So let's say that you've got a bank account with Wells Fargo. And let's say you've got a car loan with Wells Fargo. Yeah, there we go. And so what happens when, let's say your car payment is $100 per month. Okay. and you've got $1,000 in your bank account with Wells Fargo. And so you go ahead and make a payment. You send a check to Wells Fargo, if that's even a thing anymore.
Actually, apparently it is. I heard some guy he was for alimony checks he had to send to his ex-wife. He got pictures of him and his new wife put on the checks so he can send it to his alimony. So apparently they do still exist.
That's funny. But so you send Wells Fargo a check, and most people think that Wells Fargo takes your check and now they have more money. So the asset side of their balance sheet increases by $100. That's kind of how most people think, because if I gave you $100, well, the asset side of your balance sheet would increase by the $100 I just gave you.
Common sense, like simple math. Yeah.
Yeah. But that's not how it works.
Not with banks.
Not with banks.
Not in reality.
So what happens is that if you paid them $100, well, that they would just deduct the $100 from your bank account, and their liabilities would just decrease by that $100. So they're you see what they're doing there is that part, now they would have some equity. But as far if you're just looking at their balance sheet as the liabilities and the assets, excluding the equity, their balance sheet would just get smaller. It wouldn't get bigger as a result of you paying them that $100. You know, so that's my main point, is that's all that happens, is their liabilities just go down. They don't get an extra $100 of assets on their balance sheet. Okay, so why is that important? Because the Federal Reserve is a bank, just like this commercial bank here. So what happens is the primary dealer banks, and a lot of the commercial banks themselves, and the Treasury, by the way, has an account with the Fed. That's their checking account. And the Fed, as we know, they have assets, a lot of treasuries and mortgage-backed securities and whatnot. So if you think about what happens in the process of a reverse repo, it's where the bank, the commercial bank, wants to buy let's say a treasury from the Fed, or you could look at it from the Fed standpoint. They want to borrow money from the bank or bank reserves. So there's bank reserves that go from the bank to the Fed, and then the Treasury as collateral goes from the Fed over to the commercial bank, right? And that's kind of the collateral for the loan. And then whatever the maturity on the transaction, then they go ahead and swap back. Okay. So but it's the same process. You see, the quote unquote money that the commercial bank has with the Fed is already a liability of the Fed. They're those bank reserves. So if they're buying, let's say, or if the transaction is $1 billion, if the Fed was operating in the space of reality, like a normal bank, what would happen is the treasuries would come off the Fed's balance sheet. They'd go on to the balance sheet of the commercial bank, and then the bank reserves or the liabilities of the Fed would be reduced by that amount. Okay. But if you look at the Fed's actual website and see how this is done, the assets that they hold are in something called a SOMA portfolio. And if they do a reverse repo, although that commercial bank can do whatever they want to with the Treasury, as the Treasury is still on the balance sheet of the Fed. It never leaves.
Right.
So if the commercial bank sold that treasury, let's say they think the price of treasuries are going down, therefore the interest rates are going up, right? And let's say their reverse repo with the Fed is 2 weeks. So that bank that gets the treasury as collateral, they're like, shoot, I think I can make a quick buck. I can sell this treasury or sell it short. Really, they're betting on the price going down. I can sell this treasury into the market, then buy it back at a cheaper price and pocket the spread when I have to give it back to the Fed. Okay. So when they sell that treasury into the market, that goes onto the balance sheet of another institution,
Right.
financial, or it could go on your balance sheet, or it could go on my balance sheet. Well, wait a minute.
It's just
It's still on
shuffling
the
it.
balance sheet of the Fed.
Yeah, it's
And
insane.
I would like to point out that the payment to the Fed, the reduction of the bank reserves, was never done. Never. The balance sheet is identical to how it was prior to the transaction.
On the bank's end.
On every end.
Every
Because
end.
let's think about how we started. We started with the balance sheet of the Fed having one treasury and one, let's say, block of bank reserves. And let's just say they're the equivalent amount, $1 billion and $1 billion. $1 billion of treasuries, $1 billion in bank reserves. That's how we start. Because remember, those liabilities of the Fed are the asset of the commercial bank. They're one and the same. So what happens generally is the treasury would leave the balance sheet of the Fed and the bank reserves would be decreased. It would go down to zero. So now what happens is that if you combine both balance sheets, the only thing you have left is a treasury. There's no more bank reserves because
Right.
that's what was used to pay for it. You see? So there's no more bank liabilities on the liability side of the Fed. And then what would happen is that bank would sell the treasury into the market, and then it would leave that bank's balance sheet as an asset, and it would become an asset of whomever bought it out of the market, whether it's you, me, entity XYZ.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm saying is if you look at how the process works, if you actually read the Fed's website, the balance sheet never changes. So after the transaction is done, if you combined the balance sheets of all three parties, balance sheet one, the Fed, balance sheet two, the commercial bank that did the reverse repo with the Fed, and balance sheet three is, let's say, the bank or entity that bought the treasury when the commercial bank sold it into the market. If you combine all three of those balance sheets to one balance sheet, it's identical to the balance sheet that we started with prior to the transaction.
Which is insane to even think about. So, like, what was quantitative easing? Were they actually injecting capital into the system, or are they just trying to make an excuse for what's gotten out of hand?
Here's what quantitative easing was. Let's say that you're a carpenter.
Okay.
And one of your primary tools is a hammer.
Right.
What quantitative easing is buying you 100,000 hammers.
When you only need one or two, because you might break one.
And so what the market does is the market sees the fact that you have 100,000 hammers and believes that, oh my gosh, your business is going to be amazing from now on, because if you can make $100,000 a year or $50,000 a year with one hammer, holy cow, you can make a ton with 100,000 hammers. But in reality, you really can't use more than 4 or 5 hammers.
Right.
But what happens is the market looks at your stock and buy, and it goes way up because the market believes something to be true that really is just a game of smoke and mirrors. Now, let me add to that. We'll add to that analogy. If you were to hire 100,000 more carpenters, then yes, it is true that you could use and you could benefit from those 100,000 hammers. But you'd have to find 100,000 carpenters, and it would still be up to you. It wouldn't be up to me. If I was the guy that was giving you those 100,000 hammers, it wouldn't. The control is not in my. It's not. It's not up to me. The control of that. The control is on you. And so it's the exact same thing with the Fed and bank reserves and the commercial banking system. You see, the Fed can create infinity bank reserves, and it's up to the commercial banks to actually use those bank reserves
To get them out in the public.
to create more loans in the real economy, to create more dollars. Just the creation of bank reserves does nothing. It's just like giving you 100,000 hammers. It's the same thing. But my point that I'm making in this kind of over the overarching theme is the Fed wants to take control of the game, and they can do that through that central bank digital currency. But more specifically, with this video you're referring to on why QE isn't real, it's because if you really think about it, we've consolidated. There's only one balance sheet. Like, the balance sheet doesn't change regardless of the transaction. So what's happening is, although the bank reserves might be increasing, the asset side of the balance sheet pretty much stays the same, unless they're manipulating it through some sort of financial engineering by the entities involved just having direct access to this one consolidated balance sheet, which effectively it is. At surface level, yes, the Fed has a balance sheet, the commercial bank has a balance sheet, the hedge fund, the financial, they all have different balance sheets. But effectively, they are one that can just be accessed by any of the financial players involved to either kick the can further down the road or to create some sort of derivative or financial engineering to pocket the spread in the interim. That's what you start to realize when you think these things through.
That is crazy. And it's even crazier you came to this conclusion. But when I was thinking about all this, it made and your presentation, and again, I'm looking forward to the whiteboard video, but it made me think a lot about the Banking for All Act that they've been introducing, which basically gives everybody a Federal Reserve account. Does the Federal Reserve need the other banks, or ultimately are we leading to distrust in the banking system and the Federal Reserve and the central banks becoming the buyer and lender of last resorts? Is that where we're headed?
Well, I think we're already there. I mean, you got to
the other banks
think about
still
what would
exist.
happen. What would have happened back in 2020 if the Fed would not have stepped in and the government would not have stepped in?
Technically, I think the system would have crashed.
Yeah.
And it should have. We should have let it crash, and we should have, because all we're doing is we put a Band-Aid on a broken bone, and that's obviously not going to solve the problem. Now, the way you're talking about it with the CBDCs and the digital currencies, they could have a better handle on it, but that's kind of one of the worst things that we could ask for, because that puts a complete different level of control that the government has over top of all of us. It takes away any sort of privacy. When you talked about about owing money, if you owe the money, you don't repay your loans, they could just take your stuff because it's all digital. They can program the money to where they can have it come back to them if it's in your digital wallet. And then imagine the idea of connecting things up with Internet of Things and having like smart homes. And then you could essentially even be shut out of your own home if you don't comply, almost like the Black Mirror to an extreme.
I think that's a component of the social score.
Yeah.
So when you're talking about the Internet of Things, I also, that's just, they're collecting data. Every single thing you do is being watched, it's being monitored, and it's being collected in a centralized database. If you think about, what the world looks like in 10 years, it's not outlandish to think that there's a camera on every street corner. I mean, now when you go into a grocery store, a lot of times there's cameras there that are, watching you as you go in. Just more recently, or when I was in Arizona, I tried to sell my car and I couldn't even get the paper title to the car without going through this process with the DMV where I had to set up an account online. It's like setting up a Facebook account with the local DMV, but they're actually encouraging me to use facial recognition to access the account.
It makes their job
easier. Of course,
easier.
they do these email verifications, right, to make sure it's a legit email. And I noticed when they emailed me the confirmation email, it didn't come from the DMV. It came from Microsoft.
Wow.
So what I'm saying is that all your information from DMV, it's all, the facial recognition, it syncs up with these cameras, it syncs up with your television, it syncs up with your computer, and it determines what you are doing at pretty much every point throughout the day and through the night. Now, if you read the World Economic Forum's blog posts, many of them, they reference this world that they envision in 2030, where everyone has microchips implanted in under their skin for health reasons. So that we, of course, have this universal health care. And so to make the healthcare system more efficient, what these computer chips would do is submit all of your vital signs to this centralized database that could use artificial intelligence to crunch these numbers and determine, if you're more susceptible to a heart attack or something like that, and take some sort of preventative measure that could reduce overall health costs. This is kind of this is what they say, but if you think about the power that gives the government, it assumes that we always have some sort of benevolent dictator. The problem is, whenever the government has that much power, it attracts people who have an insatiable lust for power.
Yes.
If someone is a sociopath and they want to control other people, usually that's not the person we want calling the shots. And you see, that's the problem with more and more government, is those are the types of people that it attracts to a greater degree, right? So, but the point is, all of this information is going to them. They're crunching the numbers to the point where your vital signs, even in this blog, and this is them saying this, it's not me, even to the point where they're monitoring your thoughts and your dreams, and that is going into this, we'll call it the cloud, that's controlled by the central planners, and they're using artificial intelligence to crunch those numbers, and somehow that's going to lead to a utopian society. Now, I think this all goes back to communism, and it goes back to Marxism. From the standpoint, if you study Marx, you realize that he actually wasn't a real enemy of capitalism. He actually understood the value in capitalism, and he said that, listen, if you have a feudalist society, you can't go from feudalism to communism. That doesn't work.
You can do it if you put federalism in the middle.
To capitalism, and let the capitalists do what they do well, create industry. And then once you get to this point, that the modern Marxists call late stage capitalism or end stage capitalism, then it's up to the socialists or the communists to come in and use whatever means necessary to take the means of production away from the capitalists and distribute it throughout society to take society and move it forward. Because if they don't do that, the capitalists are going to basically self-destruct, and we're going to go back to this world of feudalism that we were in, 200 years ago, something like that. So when you see these riots by the Marxists or groups who kind of favor Marxism, in their minds, they truly believe that if they don't take over the means of production through violence or through voting or through whatever they can, that the capitalists are going to self-destruct, and they're going to take down society, and we're going to go back to some sort of agrarian feudalist world where we're all serfs serving this lord. Ironically enough,
I think we're still there, though. I mean,
yeah, that's what's ironic is their prescription for how to move forward actually takes us into the world in which they're trying to avoid, right? But if let's assume for a moment that you believe that that communism actually is good, socialism is good, but there were just a couple things wrong with it, that if we could just fix those two or three things, that we would be able to move society forward into this utopian state. Number one thing would be price signals and price discovery. You see, prices are what allows us to efficiently leverage and utilize scarce resources, you see, because without those prices, we don't know where to send the lumber. We don't know where to send the concrete. We don't know where to send the labor or the capital. We need prices. And if you look at communist Russia, And if you're a Marxist and you go back and study it, one of the conclusions that you come to is, number one, they started communism too soon. They should have let capitalism run longer. And number two is that they didn't have any prices, and therefore they just couldn't allocate those scarce resources with alternative uses in a way that was efficient. And that's why you had broad famine when they've got Ukraine right there. That's technically the breadbasket of that entire region, right? So if you're one of these central planners that believes that's the path forward, how do you solve the problem of price signals? Okay, well, what you'd need to do is you'd need to aggregate all of this data as much as you possibly could, and you would need something smarter than a human being or a group of human beings in order to figure out where you need to allocate those resources if there are no prices telling you where they should go.
Right.
So you see, this takes us right back to a central bank digital currency, where if they're able to monitor every single transaction, even though they're controlling prices, so they're not getting, and they're getting prices, but the prices aren't telling them anything because the prices are fixed and controlled. But they can see the volumes, they can read people's thoughts, they can get their vital statistics, they see all the transactions that are happening in real time. Then they could take this artificial intelligence and they could layer it over all of the data, and then maybe they could have a system that's even better than free market capitalism at allocating resources without the price signals. And if they don't need the price signals, then we can have the upside of socialism without any of the downside. I think if you're going to assume that they're benevolent and their intentions are good, I think that's the direction they're going.
That's interesting. It really is. And I really do appreciate you sharing your perspective on this. I am going to be respectful of your time. We're about at that mark. I wanted to let people know that you're going to be having a conference going on in Miami that's sold out. I'm going to be in Miami about a week beforehand. You're going to be in the same areas. Maybe we're going to connect up. Maybe we could do something in person potentially and continue a little bit of this conversation, because there's so much more to talk about, especially when it comes to the central bank digital currencies. And if you get a chance, I would definitely encourage you to make sure that you're checking out the Economist magazine. Here's the little cover thing that they put on there, the government issued digital currency in tech we trust.
Yeah.
And, it's got a full on digital currencies that matter. And get ready, your favorite Fed coin and the euro, because I know that you're a big, huge fan of the Federal Reserve. It's probably one of your favorite institutions, right?
Yeah, that's all central planning. Yeah, I love it all.
So I do encourage people to make sure they're checking out both your YouTube channels, the Rebel Capitalist Show, which is more low key, and then the George Gammon YouTube channel, which has like interviews with people like Peter Schiff and a lot of other important people. Lynn Alden's in there. So there's a lot of really good Kim Kiyosaki. So I encourage people to make sure they're checking that out. And I did want to add, and I meant to say too, you have your audio podcast for people who like to listen to podcasts on the go. But for people that are interested in heading over to georgegammon.com and maybe interested in Rebel Capitalist Pro with the stock picks, research, live Q&As with yourself, Lynn Alden, and Chris McIntosh, do you mind kind of giving I want to give you a moment here to go ahead and promote what you do and what you offer and what people can expect.
Well, thank you. Rebel Capitalist Pro is an online investment forum and community. And the pros in Rebel Capitalist Pro are Lynn Alden and Chris McIntosh. I'm by no means a professional. I'm just the amateur involved. But they are two of the smartest people on the planet Earth. And so what we do is we take the research they're doing, in Chris's case, for running his hedge fund, and in Lynn's case, for managing her own portfolio and for her clients. And we have that research within the community. So it's posted there in PDF form. So our members have access to the research. In addition to that, Of course, it's a normal forum community, like a Facebook group kind of, where the members are asking questions. We've got threads. Everyone's talking about, commodities or Bitcoin or what's going to happen with the dollar, inflation, or a lot of the things that we've discussed here. And then we also do live streams with the three of us, usually individually, where the members can go ahead and ask us questions directly, and we can answer those questions regarding specific topics and whatnot. And then Chris and Lynn offer stock picks, and although I hate to really talk about that, because I don't think people should delegate their thinking to any guru. I'm really opposed to that. But I like to say that you should use Lynn and Chris and a Rebel Capitalist Pro membership as your employees. If you were a hedge fund manager, you would hire research analysts, and you wouldn't hire those research analysts necessarily to help you think. You just use them to do all the research, and then you would come to your own conclusions on what's right for you and how to build a portfolio. That's how you should look at Rebel Capitalist Pro. It's your research analyst, and it'll help you make a lot better decisions. But ultimately, they're your decisions. They're not mine or Lynn's or Chris's.
Well said. Well said. And actually, Lynn is somebody who I was going to mention to you. I didn't know until going to your website that you were working with her. And that is somebody who I definitely would like to interview. She's got some really interesting thoughts when it comes to economics and Bitcoin. And that was another thing I wanted to kind of get into a little bit about crypto. But hopefully we can connect up on, in Miami and do something short, a little quick in-person follow-up. But again, I really do appreciate your time. I do know that I'm going to let people know that the event that you have coming up in Miami on the 11th and 13th is sold out, but there's going to be an announcement for another event, so people can stay tuned for that. And that'll be on your I'm assuming your actual georgegammon.com and then on your YouTube channels. But
yeah, well, you can just keep going to Rebel Capitalist Live, because as soon as Rebel Capitalist Live 1 is over, then we're going to update the entire page with what we're doing for the second one, which will be in January.
Okay, cool. Sweet. I appreciate that. If you can hold on for 1 minute, I want to go ahead and really quickly just do the wrap up for this video.
Sure.
Ladies and gentlemen, going to have links down below for everything we talked about. Make sure you're checking out georgegammon.com and also both YouTube channels, George Gammon and the Rebel Capitalist Show. And if this is your first time ever watching any of my videos, I do encourage you to explore my channel. Make sure you subscribe, hit that like button. Follow me on Odyssey, where I have backups of all my videos and post up extra content. Check out ricetvx.com and make sure you're signing up on the mailing list, because I did get a strike recently, and this way you would stay up to date and know why I'm not putting out videos for 7 days. As always, I encourage you to be the change by practicing change.